Greetings! Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath of repentance, Sabbath that comes during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance, this very solemn time between the Festival of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, and looking forward beyond these 10 days then to the Festival of Tabernacles and the 8th day of Sacred Assembly. There's a story about an ultra-Orthodox Jew who went to his rabbi and said, well, I have to tell you something that it upsets me, but I ate a formal meal. I ate a meal with bread without washing my hands and saying the appropriate benediction. Well, the rabbi was rather surprised. Well, he said, I'm sorry to hear about that. Well, what's going on here? So he said, well, the reality is that it was not in a kosher restaurant. The rabbi says, what? You're not eating in a kosher restaurant? And so the fellow said, well, all the kosher restaurants were closed. All the kosher restaurants were closed? Well, it was Yom Kippur. Oh, no. The Day of Atonement. Yeah, that's a cute story, but obviously fasting on the Day of Atonement is a serious matter. Fasting on Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. I want to go to Matthew, the 9th chapter. I'm calling this talk, While Waiting for the Bridegroom. While Waiting for the Bridegroom. When your best friend is getting married, you're really excited. You want to celebrate along with him. The guys get together, and sometimes they have a gathering with the groom, before the wedding, and of course they're very excited on the day of the wedding. Well, what happens though when the bridegroom isn't there? When you're waiting for the event to occur, you're not celebrating then. The bridegroom isn't there. In Matthew 9 and verse 14, then the disciples of John came to him, to Jesus, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Well, we're waiting for the second coming of Christ. He isn't here. So it's a much more sober time than when he's going to be back here. The world as it is now is a much more miserable place than what it's going to be when Jesus Christ returns. So Jesus says that Christians will fast while awaiting the millennium. So you'd think all the more so should we fast on the day when God commanded his people to do that, to afflict their souls, to fast. And that day this year is coming up very soon. I'm speaking, as I said, between the Festival of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. And so I'm looking in effect forward, anticipating the day of fasting, which is coming up very soon, which occurs every year on the 10th day of the 7th month on the sacred calendar. Now, the Jewish community at the time of Christ had already established, besides the commanded fast day, they had established other fast days for the community. And these were officially accepted upon the community and have been kept up until this very day. I'm speaking now in 2019 on the Roman calendar, 5780 on the Jewish calendar, and these fast days are still being observed. And later on in history, another was even added. So other than the Day of Atonement, there are 5 other fast days that are kept in the Jewish community. Wanted to talk about them today as we look forward to this commanded fast for everybody. I want to go, well, first let me go to the later one, perhaps, one that's later in Jewish history. And that is the fast of Esther. The fast of Esther is observed on the 13th day of the 12th month. You know that Purim, a Jewish festival, not commanded on the entire church, but a festival the Jews have committed themselves to observe, that occurs on the 14th and 15th days of that month, the 12th month, the month of Adar. And let's go to chapter 9 of Esther. And I'll jump in and talk about how Esther and Mordecai had caused the Jews to commit themselves to celebrate Purim as a very festive time. I'm going to go to Esther 9, verse 29. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning the matters of their fasting and lamenting. Just as they had days of fasting and lamenting, which I'm going to talk about, they also now are going to have this extra festival day, the festival of Purim. And we also find in later history, the Jews added the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah. And Hanukkah was observed by Jesus Christ in John the 10th chapter, verses 22, 23. You can see there, so Jesus honored that holiday. And one would presume he honored Purim as well. And in fact, I think there's a hint in John 5 that possibly the Sabbath in John 5 is the Sabbath before Purim. However, there's, scholars differ on that. But in any case, we have the holiday of Purim, and the Jews decided later on to have a fast right before the feasting. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the Jews, of course, destroyed their enemies. They were given permission to arm themselves, defend themselves. And they had the support of the empire behind them. So their enemies, who were originally going to exterminate them, their enemies in turn got exterminated. The tradition is that before carrying out that defense, they fasted. There's also a reference to fasting in the book itself, as we all know. And I'll go to Esther 4. She asked the people to fast. I won't read it, but I'll just tell you. And if you go to Esther 4, she asked the Jews in her area to fast. Since I'm turning there, I'll just read it. This is verse 16 of Esther 4. Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Well, she didn't. She's in a way a type of Jesus Christ. She was as good as dead, but she didn't die, and she saved her people. So anyway, so we have that fast talked about there. Now, the fast of Esther is dawn until dusk. It's not a full day. It's dawn to dusk, and Orthodox Jews will keep the fast until the at least as far as solid food is concerned, until the finishing of the reading of the book of Esther that evening. They may when they go to synagogue maybe have something to drink, but they won't really eat anything until ultra-Orthodox Jews until the Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, has been read through, and then at that time they'll break their fast, and then they'll be feasting for a couple of days, and particularly most Jews on the 14th, the next day, that night, and the next day. So that is the fast of Esther. But there are fasts mentioned directly in the Bible, and let's go to the second book of 2 Kings. The fast days in the Bible were centered around the most traumatic event in the history of God's people up to that time, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, the ending of the sacrifices, the exile of God's people to Babylonian captivity. fast days were established around that period. Now, when they returned, they kept those fast days, and what do you suppose? The very day on which the temple was destroyed, it was destroyed again at the time of the Roman Empire, the second destruction of the temple, and a rescattering of the Jews. And, the history from that point on has been the Jews as a diaspora people until in recent years they have been regathering back to their ancestral homeland. So I want to go into that a bit today. I want to go to 2 Kings, and I'll go to the end of the 24th chapter. We talk about Zedekiah as a sinner. Well, I'll just mention that he unfortunately continued to sin, and he had pledged loyalty to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Chaldean Empire, the Babylonians. He had pledged loyalty, and he broke his pledge, and they came down on him. I'm going to chapter 25. Now it came to pass, excuse me, in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and encamped against it, and they built a siege wall against it all around. So notice this occurs on the 10th day of the 10th month. So in January 15th of 588 BC, a siege begins that lasts a year and a half. It goes to the midsummer of 587. And this was really the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people, the subjugation of the Jewish people, which really has not fully ended. It won't fully end until we have the second coming of Christ, the Messianic age. So it's a very significant date. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. I'm reading now. And I go to the 3rd verse. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Now, the fast day has been fixed to be the 17th day of that month for various reasons. And I think it has to do with the fact that on the 17th day of the 4th month, the sacrificial system ended. And I believe that occurred based upon my reading of Josephus in AD 70, and perhaps also here. As far as I understand Josephus, from the 17th day of the 4th month in AD 70 until now, there have been no sacrifices offered. And also, it was on the 17th day of the 4th month in AD 70 that the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem. So that became the day of fasting rather than the 9th day, as you read here. The Jews also believe that Moses broke the tablets at that time on the 17th day of the 4th month because of the incident, the golden calf incident. Then the city wall was broken through, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden, even though the Chaldeans were still encamped all around against the city, and the king went by way of the plain. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, and it overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his army was scattered from him. And it goes on to give in grisly detail what happened, and you can read on. And I'll go now to the 8th verse. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. So the siege begins on the 7th day. It goes all the way to the 10th. That's the period of destruction. And the Jews fixed the day of fasting more or less middle of that time, the 9th day of the 5th month. And that became the day to read the Lamentations, traditionally written by Jeremiah. And so the 9th day of Av, that fast day, became the time to remember the destruction of the Second Temple and to read the book of Lamentations. That is the festival scroll for midsummer. And as the Jews gathered together to read that psalm, that Lamentations book, their second temple was being destroyed as they gathered together in various cities around the Mediterranean to read about it in AD 70. Their second temple was being destroyed. And many other calamities have occurred on that date. People who are knowledgeable of Jewish history, who want to oppress the Jews, seem to want to pick that date to do terrible things to the Jews, almost as if like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's interesting. So I'm going to read a little bit here. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the night. So you understand that there's a fast now of the 10th month, there's a fast now of the 4th month, and now there's a fast of the 5th month. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Eternal and the king's house, all the houses of Jerusalem. That is, all the houses of the great he burned with fire. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with him, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. The Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive the rest of the people who remained in the city, and the defectors who had deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude. I'm going to jump down to, now there were some left behind also. Let me read that too, because that's important. But the captain of the guard left some of the poor of the land as vine dressers and farmers. So he did leave some behind, but unfortunately this wasn't the end of the story. Let's go to verse 22. The Jews had been conquered, destroyed, scattered, the temple destroyed, the monarchy ended, but nevertheless Judah remained as an entity, as, let's say, a subdivision on the political map of the Middle East. Now they had a governor who was under the control of the Babylonians. His name was Gedaliah. So in verse 22, then he made Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, governor over the people who remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left. Now, there's a more detailed discussion of this in Jeremiah 40 through chapter 42. It's very tragic because the Jews could have maintained themselves under Gedaliah, but no, some decided they were still going to try to battle the Babylonians and make common ground with other Gentiles in the area, and so there was an assassination of Gedaliah. Well, now Judah disappears from the map, just as in later history there was a nation of Poland which just disappeared. Prussia took some, Austria-Hungary took some, Russia took some, and it became just a region rather than a political entity until after the First World War. So here, the assassination of Gedaliah basically removes Judah as a part of the map of the Middle East, and it also leads eventually to further attacks by the Babylonians, which evidently occur around 5 years later, which is the end of a 40-year period of trial over Judah. It goes from 622 to 582, and it ends with a final Babylonian incursion into the area to just wipe out all resistance. And I'll read about that in a little while. But I want to read here about what happened to Gedaliah. And as I said, you can read about it in greater detail in Jeremiah 40 through 42. You can also notice in Jeremiah 39 a reference to the beginning of the siege. Are you all with me so far? Good, because I'm going to also mention Ezekiel later. Now in verse 23, now when all the captains of the armies, they and their men heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah governor, they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah, Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, Johanan the son of Kareah, Sariah the son of Tanhumeth, and the Netophathite, and Jazaniah the son of a Maachathite, they and their men. And Gedaliah took an oath before them and their men, and said to them, "Do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Dwell in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you." But, these people had sinned over and over again. That's how they got into that mess. And unfortunately, there were those who still wouldn't listen. Now, it happened in the 7th month. Remember, the disaster occurred in the 5th month. Now they're kind of gathering together, and now we have the 7th month. And I'm speaking to you now in the 7th month. But it happened in the 7th month that Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck and killed Gedaliah the Jews as well as the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. And all the people, small and great, and the captains of the armies arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. Now Jeremiah told them not to do that, but they did, and the punishments followed them there. Although Jeremiah was able to escape from that, and he had work to do that I can cover maybe at another time. So I want to tell you then that this time of the assassination of Gedaliah also became a day of fasting, and that fast occurs in the 7th month. Now, because the Festival of Trumpets occurs in the 7th month, the fast of Gedaliah has been established, at least for the last couple of thousand years or so, as the 3rd day of the 7th month. So it's the week before the Day of Atonement, but again, it is not a full day. It is dawn to dusk. The Muslims have the tradition of Ramadan, somewhat similar, where for 30 days they don't eat during the day. So we have the fast of the 3rd month, the fast of the 10th month, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, and the fast of the 7th month. Now I want to tell you something. The fast of the 5th month is such a serious matter. The destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, the exile of the people, and it happened twice. That is a full day. The Jews, Orthodox Jews, fast as long on that day as they fast on the Day of Atonement, the 9th of Av. But the other days, the other fast days, the other 4, are from dawn to dusk. And of course in the summer, that's a longer period than in the winter. Okay, so are you with me? Now, I want to say something more about the 10th of Tevet in Ezekiel 24. It's a long chapter, so I'm not going to read the entire chapter, but I want to mention that Ezekiel 24 occurs at the time that the siege begins. Chapter 24 of Ezekiel. Again, in the 9th year, this is the 9th year of Zedekiah, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, the word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Son of man, write down the name of the day, this very day. The king of Babylon started his siege against Jerusalem this very day. And utter a parable to the rebellious house, and say to them, Thus says the Lord Eternal. And you can read the parable and what he had to do. And that this was a time when he was not able to speak, other than when God intervened and inspired him to have a message. Otherwise, he was silent. It was a witness to the people in captivity to whom he was preaching, that God was intervening in a very special way. So this prophet would speak only when inspired to speak. Otherwise, he couldn't. And what was really, really, really sad is what happened to him as part of the disaster that would occur to God's people. His wife dies at this time. I'm looking at verse... Verse 20. Well, I'm trying to find where his wife dies as a result. Let's go to verse 24. Thus Ezekiel is. Well, I think I'll go even earlier, because I want to. Let's go to verse 15. Also the word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Son of man, behold, I take away from you the desire of your eyes with one stroke. Yet you shall neither mourn nor weep, nor shall your tears run down. Sigh in silence. Make no mourning for the dead. Bind your turban on your head, and put your sandals on your feet. Do not cover your lips, and do not eat man's bread of sorrow. So don't let your hair grow out and not dress normally as a mourner. Just be normal, because many people are being destroyed at this time. He became a widow at this time. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and at evening, that would have been the 11th, either perhaps at the end of the day, maybe at the end of that day. And at evening, my wife died, and the next morning, I did as I was commanded. So probably at the end of the 10th day, she dies, as symbolic of what would happen to the nation, to the temple in Jerusalem and so forth, and to the nation. And the next morning, I did as I was commanded. So You can read the entire chapter. Now, I want to talk to you about from Zechariah 7. Now, I had planned to read a lot of Zechariah 7 and 8, but I see that because of time constraints, I'm just going to tell you, when the Jews came back from captivity and when they rebuilt their temple, they were wondering, should we continue to fast? And God never told them to stop, so they didn't. He did admonish them, if you're going to fast, be in a right attitude. Get the proper benefits out of the fast. Let's just not make it a ritual. Let's use the fast as a way of spiritual renewal. But he didn't tell them to stop. And Zechariah is speaking to them as God inspires him. They ask him, should we continue fasting? And it's interesting because they asked him this, around 520 BC, and as you know, they sinned greatly at the time of Christ, and a generation after his crucifixion and resurrection came the second destruction of Jerusalem and the second great exile. And so all through these years, they've continued to fast. And even now that they're back in the land, they continue to keep these fasts. But notice a wonderful prophecy about these fast days that we see in Zechariah 8 and verse 19. It ends on a very positive note. These fast days that the Jews have set aside, the fast of the fourth month, the 17th of Tammuz, and then the fast of the fifth month, the 9th of Av, which sometimes is kept on the 10th. When the 9th of Av occurs on a Sabbath, it is observed then on Sunday the 10th. And then we have the fast of the seventh month, which is the fast of Gedaliah, an extra fast, and a week before Atonement is when it's kept over the last, some number of centuries. And then the fast of the 10th day, the 10th month. These days, which were accepted upon the Jews as fast days, as early as this period that I'm talking about, and has continued all these years, 2,500 years of these fasts. Here's what God says about them. Zechariah 8:19. Thus says the Eternal of Hosts, the fast of the fourth month, the fast of the fifth, the fast of the seventh, and the fast of the 10th shall be joy and gladness and cheerful feasts for the house of Judah. Therefore, love, truth, and peace. Be positive, realize that we fast to get spiritually back on track, but that ultimately, we're heading for victory. God is the winner. We're the winner because we're the winners with him, under him, and we should love the truth and peace because these fast days are eventually going to be days of feasting. So I do want to go back then to Matthew the 9th chapter. We're coming to a time very soon when we'll be afflicting our souls with fasting, and we'll be looking forward to a time when we won't need to eat. We won't need to drink. We won't need to sleep. We'll be spirit. And we can only imagine how wonderful it will be to be spirit. And we'll be able for all eternity to not have to worry about harm coming to us or aging or any of the problems that we deal with now. In Matthew 9 and verse 14, then the disciples of John came to him saying, this is Matthew 9:14, why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. He also warned them that they needed to become renewed, as he told Nicodemus, even though you're Jews, you need to be converted. Gentiles need to be converted. They would assume that, but they needed to be converted. All of us need to repent and be baptized and receive God's Spirit. All of us need to be renewed. And so he goes on to say here, no one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment and the tear is made worse. So if we're going to be teachable, we have to be renewed. We have to be born again, as the Bible tells us, and then continually renewed, continually renew our commitment. Nor do they put new wine into old, and this is one reason for these festival days, one reason for the Day of Atonement and these other festival days. Normally they are feast days, and Atonement is a fast day. Nor do they put new wine into old wineskins, or else the wineskins break, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. So as we are renewed during this festival season, we are then ready to have even a deeper relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So let's keep this in mind while awaiting the bridegroom. All the best to you and yours.